Hi guys, this is Vineet and this is the video on stored procedures. So stored procedures are basically similar to functions with few exceptions, or there are many SQL elements that are not present inside the functions. In stored procedures we can modify data as well in the database. In stored procedures we can apply data definition changes to the database, or maybe we can change the structure of the tables, etc., whatever comes under the data definition. And we can use temporary variables inside the stored procedures, and we can do error handling, and they also support the input and output parameters like functions. And there is also one benefit of using stored procedures, which is that the SQL Server caches the execution plans of the stored procedures queries, and then reuses those plans during the subsequent execution of the stored procedure. So basically, whenever you create a query and when you execute a query, the SQL Server creates the execution plan for that. For example, let me show you one of the queries. So I'm taking the Northwind database here and I'm clicking on new query. I'm doing select star from orders table. There is a button in SQL to get the execution plan instead of executing the query. So let me check where is that button. So execute is to execute the query, and let me see. So this is the button showing display estimated execution plan, or you may use the shortcut Control L for that. So let's click on that. So it will show me when I will click on this button, it will show me the execution plan for this particular query. Select star from orders. So here it is giving me some items like what particular index it will scan in order to fetch the data out from the orders table, and where is the maximum cost involved. So in this case the maximum cost is involved in scanning the index for this particular table. More details on understanding the execution plans for a query can be found in one of my other videos, which I will upload soon. So let's close this for now and go back to our documentation. So basically I just shown you the execution plans. So if I use this particular query, select star from orders, in one of the functions, or maybe any other query in one of the stored procedures, we'll get one benefit that SQL Server caches these execution plans of the stored procedure queries are used inside the stored procedures, and it uses those during the it reuses those execution plans during the subsequent execution of the stored procedure. And it is very simpler to deploy the stored procedure instead of making the changes in the application. So basically how the applications are designed, basically applications are designed with the minimal code, and the maximum code is placed inside the stored procedure. So whenever we invoke certain function from the application, it basically invokes the stored procedure in the background, which is a sequence of tsql code, and stored procedure performs all the necessary computations within the database server and return the result back to the application. So we prefer to write minimal code, minimal tsql code inside the applications these days, and basically it simplifies the deployment. So whenever the changes are required in this mechanism, we can make changes in the stored procedure directly instead of modifying the code of the application, which is a quite complex process. And there will be less network traffic when we call the stored procedure from within the application. Whenever a stored procedure is called from the application, only the procedure name is passed to the database engine along with the parameters through the network to the DB server, And finally, the database engine performs the computation um, using that particular stored procedure and sends the result back to the application. And it also simplifies the handling of securities in the database. In the sense, we can define security within the stored procedure. So basically, let me discuss this example. It simplifies the handling of the security in the database. When we don't want user to directly grant access to queries and update the database in the tables. So if we don't want our users to directly query any tables, or if we don't want any of our users to directly update the data in the tables, we can let them achieve these tasks indirectly by using the stored procedures. They just need to execute permission on the stored procedure to execute it, and the stored procedure will be responsible for executing any queries or making changes to any data through those queries. And basically, the users need only execute permission on the stored procedure and do not need permission to the underlying objects used by the stored procedure. So this is a very simpler mechanism. And we have so far discussed about the pros, and let's discuss about the cons of using stored procedure. So unlike functions, stored procedure cannot be used inside the queries. By that we mean that we cannot use the stored procedure inside a select query like we used functions before in the select query in our previous videos. So let me move over to the next slide. So which provides us, this slide provides us the working knowledge of stored procedures. So basically, a stored procedure is a reusable set of code and can be called many times, and can be used with input and output parameters and can return a result of a query. So for this working example, we will be using this orders table from the Northwind database. The structure of order table is given below, with order ID is the primary key. This is the integer type key. Customer ID is varchar or nchar to promote Unicode characters as well. And employee ID is integer type, and order date. So we will be using the first 4 fields out of this table. So here is an example. So let's review this code. So we need to write this code in SQL Server Management Studio to create a procedure name order info. Let me mark this as bold. Okay, we need to create a procedure name order info. So here is the code for that. Create or alter proc or procedure. We can specify procedure keyword in full as well. So the code is create or alter procedure, and we need to specify the procedure name. Here DBO is the schema name under which we are creating the stored procedure, and these are the variables. We are using 4 variables: order ID, order date, customer ID, and employee ID. These are the parameters, input parameters that we are using, and we are specifying the types of these parameters. So order ID, we are taking it as integer. Order date we are taking as date, and customer ID we are taking as varchar 50 because on the top it is specified nchar 5. So we have take variable character of 50 length, and employee ID we are taking as integer, and we are also specifying the default value of these parameters in case a user does not specify the value during call to this stored procedure. By default, these parameters will take null value if the value is not specified for them. So in the next piece of code, we are using the set exact abort and the no count option to on. We are setting these settings to on. We will discuss about these settings soon. And the next piece of code is we are selecting the order ID, order date, ship date, customer ID, employee ID. We are selecting 5 columns, and basically 6 columns to shift by 6 column from the orders table. And here we are specifying the criteria where order ID equals to the input parameter specified by the customer or the input parameter of the stored procedure. So order ID will take this value from the value passed by the customer. If customer has not specified any value, it will take order ID is null. So it basically checks the condition. So either the customer has passed the value, it will take that value, or otherwise it will mark, it will check that order ID is null, then it marks as true. The result of this where expression is true in both the cases, even if the order ID is specified or even if the order ID is not specified. So this is the meaning of this particular statement. And we have taken the similar statement for other three parameters: order date, customer ID, employee ID. These are the columns: order date, customer ID, and employee ID. We are taking the parameter values against them, or if no value is specified, we are checking that by using this statement, or order date is null, and the other two statements for null checking. And so this particular part is the parameter header. Up till this point, it's a parameter header. So far we have not taken this parameter header, all the input parameters within the brackets. We can also take them within the brackets, like this code given below. We can use these brackets, and the rest of the code is same. And also this is the body of the stored procedure, and we can take this body within the begin and end blocks. So we can use take body within the begin and end part as like below. So we can begin. After that, the statement from set exact abort on till before go, we can put it in, and after that we can put end statement after the body of the stored procedure. Start with begin and with end. So let's discuss about these options: the set exact abort on and the no count option to on. So this particular option, set exact abort option, it determines the effect of runtime errors raised by any of the T-SQL statements that we use inside the stored procedure. And in the above code we are turning this option back to on. By default it is off. So when this option is turned off, only some error cause an open transaction to roll back. We will discuss about transaction in one of our videos soon. So you may watch our other videos to get an idea of what the transaction is. So basically here we are discussing about the exact abort option, and when this option is set to off, so some errors cause an open transaction to roll back and execution of code to be aborted. So when this option is off, the exact abort is off, and during the execution of the stored procedure, if there is any error encountered during the execution of the SQL code, so this causes the setting exact abort to off causes any open transaction to roll back. So any changes which are made to data are rolled back, and execution of the function or the stored procedure gets aborted. But this will happen for only on some of the errors. For other errors, the execution of code is aborted but the transaction remains open, which is a bad thing, because it continue to get SQL memory or the memory of the system if the transaction remains in open state. So ideally this should not be the situation. So it is a best practice to set this option to on, so that on any of the errors, any of the open transactions will get rolled back and function should be aborted. And if we set the option to on, it will, in this way, all error cause an open transaction to be rolled back and execution of code to be aborted. And let's discuss about the other option, no count on. So whenever we execute a query, let me show you an example. So for example, if we write a query, select star from orders, and if we execute this query, if we go to the messages tab, we see that it shows messages like 830 rows affected. So this is the result of setting no count option to. By default the no count option is off, so we need to set no count option to on. So if we set the no count option to on, if we execute this query, this will not yield any such statements like 830 rows affected. So let me execute this code again. So let's check the messages. So it just said completed successfully with no mention about how many rows are affected, etc. So let's see the benefit of using no count equals on. No count option suppresses any messages indicating how many rows were affected, which I had just shown you a few minutes back. And basically it suppresses any messages indicating how many rows are affected by data manipulation statements. And when this option is off, let me correct this. So basically if this option is set to off, these messages can degrade. If this option is set to off, these messages like how many numbers of rows are affected can degrade the query performance due to network traffic it generates. Plus it also causes trouble for any of the client applications which call the stored procedure by perceiving those results like how many rows are affected as query results. And we can run the following code to invoke the procedure order info, but before that we need to create that stored procedure. So I would always suggest to not just read the code but actually write that code within the SQL Server. So let me go ahead and write this code quickly inside SQL Server Management Studio. So let's close this query and take a new query. So it begins with create or alter procedure. So if the procedure is already present, it will alter the procedure instead of creating the procedure. And the procedure name, we can specify the schema name, which is DBO. And let's see what's the procedure name is. Procedure name is order info. Alright, then we specify the header of the stored procedure. We can take header inside the brackets or outside of the brackets. So we are not using brackets here, so let's see. So we are specifying 4 parameters, input parameters: order ID, order date, customer ID, employee ID. So order ID is our first parameter and we are taking it as integer, and we are specifying it to null, which would be the default value in case the value of this parameter is not specified. Let me check the types of other parameters. So order date is date, customer ID is varchar 50, and employee ID is integer. Alright, let's write this code. So second is order date as date, default value is null, and then customer ID as varchar 50 equals null. We are taking customer ID as varchar 50 because this column, the customer ID column in the orders table, contains the character data instead of the numeric one, so that's why I have not taken it as the integer data. Next we are taking employee ID as the fourth input parameter, and this is integer type, and setting it default value to null. So header is specified now, so I'm specifying the body of the function now. So I'm specifying the options exec abort and no count to on. Alright, and after that let me write the actual body of the function, which basically selects these columns: order ID, order date, ship date, customer ID, let me write order ID, order date, ship date, customer ID. So select order ID, order date, then ship date, customer ID, customer ID, and the next two columns are employee ID and ship via. ID and ship via from orders table, and we are specifying the condition within the body. So the first condition is the column order ID. It checks whether the order we are specifying the condition for the order ID to be the value passed by the customer. So we are taking order ID as order ID, or if the value is not passed by the customer, we will check it against the null. So null. So basically what do we mean by this statement is, let me discuss. So by default it checks, it will result in returning all the rows where the order ID is the value passed by the customer in the order ID input parameter. If the value is not passed by the customer for the order ID variable, then this will take the default value of null, which we are specifying here in the header of the function. So either it will take this condition where the customer has specified the value for the order ID parameter, or if it does not specify the value for the order ID input parameter, the value defaults to null, in which case the second condition evaluates to true. And similarly we have to specify the other conditions as well. So we have just specified one condition, and for other columns we have to specify the same conditions like this. So other columns are order date, customer ID, and employee ID. So let's take order date. The value for this variable comes from order date parameter, or we are taking the condition order date is null. Alright, and third parameter is value for the third column is comes from parameter customer ID, or value of the customer ID parameter is null. And last is value for the column employee ID comes from employee ID input parameter, or employee ID input parameter is null. So yeah, we are done here, and we need to terminate the statement by semicolon, and then we need to type go. Let's execute this statement. So it has given us some errors, so let's check the code. So we haven't specified the keyword as, so let's go back to the code. So whenever we start the body of the function, we need to specify the as code. So let's execute this now. So it is saying that you must declare the variable employee ID. I have mistakenly taken the wrong name of the input parameter. So it's employee ID, right? Let's execute this code again. So yeah, it has executed fine now. So let me open up another query window. We will now invoke the stored procedure, which is the name of the stored procedure is order info. So what we will do, we will execute this procedure with some set of input parameters. So we will be executing this statement. Stored procedure can be executed by putting the exec statement along with the name of the stored procedure, and we can specify the input parameter. In this example, we are just specifying one parameter, omitting the others, so other parameters will take the default null option, and it will just result in giving us details according to order ID equal to 10249. So let me execute this code. So type the exec keyword and use the order info stored procedure and specify the value of parameter order ID. What was the order ID? Let me check. We want to check for order ID 10249. So let's type that and execute the code. Here we have just specified the value of one of the parameters, omitting the rest three of them. So those parameters have taken the null value, and which resulted in just running query like for order ID equal to 10249. It will give us the result. So yeah, it has given us the 6 column order ID, order date, ship date, customer ID, employee ID, and ship via. This query has just taken this parameter order ID equal to 10249 and omitted the value of other three parameters, which is null. It has omitted altogether the value of other three parameters: the order date, customer ID, and ship via. So let's go back to the documentation. So this was the output we received. Tom SP is the customer ID. Let's check. Yeah, Tom SP is the customer ID over here. So basically using the named parameters just we have used in the code given above. Using the name parameters is the best practice. However, we can omit this name parameters, or in case we don't want to use the input parameter name, then we need to pass all value of all the 4 parameters in the proper sequence specified for the stored procedure. So the sequence was order ID first, order date second, customer ID third, and employee ID fourth parameter. Parameters for which you do not want to specify any value, you may use the default keyword for those parameters. An example is given below, so we can write the same above statement using the code given below, where we have just specified the value of the order ID column. So here we are specifying the code, but without putting the name of the input parameters. So we are using exec and the name of the stored procedure dbo.order_info, and here we are passing the value of the first parameter order ID, but we are not specifying the input parameter name order ID, but we are passing that in order. So 10249 will be the order ID, the second default is for order date, the third default is for customer ID, the fourth default is for employee ID. So let me copy this and execute this code. For you, I would suggest you to write this code and execute it after writing the code. So let's execute this code and we'll get the same result as before. So yeah, we got the same result as before, and yeah, we got the same result. So we are done with this video section. In this video we have discussed about the stored procedures, their pros and their cons, and we have also shown you one of the working examples of using the stored procedures. Where we have used the stored procedure to fetch the data out of the orders table, and the name of the stored procedure was dbo.order_info. I would suggest you to practice writing the stored procedure by actually writing the complete query from scratch in SQL Server. And guys, do like this video and subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to get more updates on uh, any of the next video released. And I thank you for watching this video.